20 days of no community transmission as at 12 midday today, and so that's the headline good news. We should always remember what is happening in the rest of the world. This is a very unusual situation to have no community transmission. Our current hospitalisation as of this morning was 10 cases in hospital, no one in ICU and no one ventilated. There hasn't been a death associated with acute COVID infection in Australia since the 19th of October. So contrast that with many other countries that are still seeing tens, hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of deaths every day. This remains a major issue for the world. So our situation here in Australia remains very strong. There's been a lot of discussion recently, and there should be, about our quarantine system. We have seen over the last few weeks a number of incursions related to quarantine. The most recent one in the last couple of days in New South Wales, after that day 16 test of someone who had been in quarantine and been found to be negative twice in quarantine. So that's a new development. We've seen some cases of the variants of concern, both in several states now, related to hotel quarantine. We've also seen a community case in New Zealand of the South African related strain. So these are new developments, and last week at National Cabinet there was a specific discussion about hotel quarantine and what we should be doing to continually improve the quality of our already very high standard hotel quarantine. Again, we need to put that in context. We've had over 211,000 people that have come back to Australia since we introduced the hotel quarantine system in March last year. We've had thousands of cases of COVID in the hotel quarantine, but very few cases that have leaked, if you like, out into the community, whether that be workers within the quarantine system or indeed people that have left quarantine and developed the infection. So we have a very good system. Can it be improved? Of course, all systems can be continuously improved. This is a complex end-to-end approach we have from when people plan to come back to Australia, going through the flights, arriving at the airports, going through the quarantine system, being safe in quarantine, and then after people have left quarantine. And so National Cabinet discussed that. It was the AHPPC, the Committee of Chief Health Officers that I chair, have been given the task to re-look at everything that we're doing for end-to-end, as we have done all through the last several months, to make sure that we, if there's anything we can think of to improve there, that we will do that. It will be based, as it always has been, on the best science available to us at the time. And so we've done many of those things in the past. In the last month we've introduced that pre-flight testing, we've introduced mandating of masks on planes, mandating of masks in airports. We've continued to look at the way that people are transported to the quarantine hotels. We continue to look at the procedures and the systems and the safety of our quarantine hotels. And as of this week, New South Wales has developed a post-quarantine checkup, including a day 16 test. So I've asked my New South Wales colleagues to give a proposal through to AHPPC, and we'll be looking at that later this week around that particular component. But that's one of many things we're looking at. The other element, of course, which is related to that is the vaccine, is the variants of concern, and so we've been charting that very carefully, not only from the international information but also here in Australia. So as of the 5th of February, we've now had 87 samples of the B117 strain, which initially was found in the UK but is now being found in many other countries around the world in our hotel quarantine system. We've also had 18 samples of the B1351 strain, originally found in South Africa, and we know that that's also spreading around the world. So there's 80 countries across all 6 WHO regions have now had imported cases or community transmission of the B117 strain, and for the South African strain, 41 countries have reported that. So that is becoming the normal strain of the virus that is circulating around the world, and we need to be prepared for those strains, which are definitely more able to be transmitted between people, may be associated with more severity, but that is still information we need to continue to watch carefully. And then the talk about how they may affect the vaccines. And so just to talk briefly about our vaccine program, that's all completely on track, enormous amount of work being done across the Australian government with our state and territory colleagues, with GPs, pharmacies and others that will be delivering this. Our logistics are being worked through. We're setting up our vaccine operations centre here in the health department to work through the scenarios of how we get those vaccines to where they need to be. We know that the Pfizer vaccine has been approved by the TGA, and we are looking very much towards a delivery of that in the coming weeks, and we're definitely on track to have those first vaccines being delivered by the end of February, as we've said, as the Prime Minister has announced. In terms of Astrazeneca, that is continuing to progress through the approvals process with the TGA. This is a very good vaccine, it's very safe, and once it goes through those processes of safety, quality and efficacy, we will be able to then to look to roll out that vaccine as well, subject of course always to the TGA advice. In terms of the Astrazeneca vaccine in particular, in relation to reports around its effectiveness, particularly in relation to the South African variant of concern, I just want to make a very clear statement about people taking small amounts of information quickly without looking at it carefully and making conclusions. So at the moment, I can absolutely say, and this may change in the future, and we'll be nimble in the way we look at that information and bring that into our planning. But at the moment, there is no evidence anywhere in the world that AstraZeneca's effectiveness against severe infection is affected by any of these variants of concern. And that's the fact. What we have at the moment is a small group of people in a study which has not yet been peer-reviewed or published in South Africa, where there was an effect on the mild or moderate disease in relation to that variant of concern in that country. But there were no severe infections in any of the people that received the vaccine in regards to any of those types of the virus. So we don't have any information on that. And we'll obviously be looking at it carefully as time goes by, and every day we get more information about that. We will be talking actually in the coming days with our UK counterparts to really look carefully at what their experience is in relation to the very widespread use of AstraZeneca in that country across all age groups. So that will be helpful data for us in our planning for the coming weeks and months, and also for the TGA in their assessment. So I'll leave it there and I'll go to questions first in the room.
Okay, so when will the first Pfizer jabs actually be on the tarmac in Australia?
So I won't go into great details there, and of course there's always the caveat, they do have to come from another country, and we heard this morning from the EU representative in Australia that they are definitely looking to allow that to happen, which was a very good news, and Pfizer, in our virtually constant discussions with them, also guarantee that they're on target to bring that to Australia in the coming weeks. Well, we remember, if we work backwards from, we have told the Australian public, and the Prime Minister has said this, and we're absolutely going by this timetable. We will have doses ready to be injected before the end of February, and I think I'll just leave it at that.
So we know that when they get here, the TGA has to do the batch testing. How long do they need to do that? As in, I guess, working backwards, what's the latest they could arrive for them to still be able to start this month?
Yeah, I'm not going to give you an exact date, but look, it's a few days. It's days rather than weeks to do that last piece of testing. That's important. That's the final piece of the quality, and we would do the same with when the Astrazeneca vaccines arrive from overseas, and we would need to do it again for the Astrazeneca product out of CSL.
And once they are actually on the tarmac, how long before they can get into arms from there? So what's the next step once they touch down?
Well, they'll touch down, and remember the Pfizer vaccine needs to be kept very strictly at a -70 temperature, so there's logistic exercises there. But we have our logistic partners in DHL and Linfox who will be doing the storage and the distribution in conjunction with Pfizer. And so they'll arrive, they'll be distributed, they have to go via the TGA for this final test, and then we'll be working with the Pfizer hubs that we're setting up with the states and territories to get them to the place they need to be for the injections.
My understanding was batch testing was actually being done overseas, so is there more batch testing to be done once they get here?
Correct.
Right. Sorry.
I was going to ask about something different. You talked about that the Astrazeneca data with the South African strain, that being a very, small amount of data. We have, more robust data about the Novavax vaccine and its efficacy, including against the South African strain and the UK strain. Have we considered waiting until the Novavax vaccine is available? I think in the past you've said that could be a more long-term answer for the world, that vaccine.
So a couple of things I'd say there about the vaccines. We need to and should and must use the vaccine that we have. So we'll be receiving the Pfizer vaccine in the coming weeks. We'll be using that. If assuming that AstraZeneca gets through the final hurdles of the TGA process, we will be using that. When the Novavax vaccine goes through those processes, and they are several months behind those other two that I've mentioned, we'll be using that. How they're used together and so forth, this is emerging information we'll look at. But I'd imagine that the protein-based vaccines will be important longer term, as potentially others will be, particularly in relation to the variants, as we gather more information about that.
So just to step back to Pfizer, so we're expecting 80,000 doses to be delivered straight up. So how soon before the next 80,000 will be delivered?
The contract we have with Pfizer is that we will have now 20 million doses between now and the end of the year. They will be coming regularly, and there'll be a weekly delivery is what we're aiming for. That's assuming no disruption to supply and the air bridge and so forth. But we will be expecting to receive them every week. We will be starting to vaccinate within a few days of them being available, and then that will continue.
And so when you say vaccinate within a few days of availability, do you mean within a few days of delivery? So once they've actually touched down on the tarmac, jabs should be announced a few days later?
There's that quality step, remember. So once that quality hurdle has been finalised, then shortly after that we'll be looking to start vaccination. By the end of the month, I'm not going to go into any further detail.
With the 80,000 doses that come in first, sorry, this is just on the same topic.
Yeah.
Professor Murphy has said, because it's obviously 2 doses, and he said we won't start something we can't finish. So does that mean that first rollout will be 40,000 people, not as do you keep the doses aside to make sure that can be finished off? How does that work?
Well, certainly we do. Both the AstraZeneca and the Pfizer vaccines are a 2-dose schedule, so we need to make sure that we have enough for that. We don't want a lot of vaccines sitting around in warehouses, so we'll be looking to roll out particularly for those priority populations that people will know about now as soon as we can. But then on the 3rd week, we'll be going back to those same population, those same people, to give them their 2nd dose. Particularly with the Pfizer, that's really important, that 3-week interval. We will await the TGA advice in relation to AstraZeneca, but some of the information that has been coming out in the last few weeks is that it may actually be a longer interval for that 2nd dose. I'm going to go to the phone to give them a chance, as there's some other people there. So I'll go to Paul Osborne from AAP.
Thank you. Got the 2 questions. The first is, as part of your review work, is any work being done to start recording the details of Australians who've had COVID shots overseas. I ask because it could be useful in knowing not only how many doses we need here, but also down the track when we're looking at policies such as shortening quarantine periods and things like that.
Well, certainly there's a lot of work that's being done with our overseas partners in relation to vaccine certificates and the like, and so proof of vaccination will be an important component to that. But look, at the moment we have a laser-like focus on commencing the Australian program for people that are in Australia. And that includes all Australians in Australia, but in fact anyone who's in Australia will be eligible to be vaccinated. So that's our main aim at the moment, and that overseas component will come along as an important issue later. At the moment, just to reiterate, we're not looking to change our 2-week hotel quarantine procedures.
And a second unrelated question. Is it true that vaccines such as Moderna can be more easily modified to deal with variants? Apparently the genetic information can be more easily rewritten and revised than the other types of vaccines.
So what we've seen in the last year since we've started on this, what I've called before a moonshot, to find at least one vaccine that works against COVID, the first ever to be used in humans successfully. We're now in this extraordinary position where we have multiple vaccines that have been shown to work, with several different platforms, including 2 very innovative platforms. One of those is the mRNA vaccines. They were unheard of a year ago in terms of humans, and certainly an unproven technology. The second one is the viral vector vaccines. That's the Astrazeneca. So the mRNA is Pfizer and Moderna and others. Astrazeneca, the Russian Sputnik 5 vaccine, is another viral vector vaccine. And then there's the more traditional ones like protein vaccines, Novavax being one of those examples, and other even more traditional vaccines like the Chinese ones, which are an inactivated virus, for example. So the more traditional methods, one of the issues with those are they do take a long time to change and to modify. The great advantage of both the mRNA and also the viral vector vaccines is they can be done more rapidly. Essentially, they're the same use of an RNA molecule, but a different way of delivering it. The issue, though, is that it's one thing to change the vaccine. There's another issue to make 9 billion of them. And so if we're going to vaccinate the whole world, that's going to take time. And so, yes, it's an advantage to be able to change the vaccine quickly, but you still have those issues of being able to get an adequate supply and going through regulatory processes, which I would imagine will be easier second time around, but that will be for the regulatory authorities to consider. I'll just go to Tamsin now at the Herald Sun.
Hi, Professor. I also have 2 questions, if that's all right, but on the same topic. We've heard a lot about hotel quarantine over the past few weeks, people saying that potentially we should be quarantining people away from large population centres and instead having centres in the regions. I'm just wondering if you could outline some of the reasons that we haven't done that already, and I guess what are some of the difficulties of a plan like that?
So if people cast their mind back to about a year ago, we did do that. We did have our first case, our first quarantine system was actually in Christmas Island when we evacuated people from Wuhan. We learned a lot from that process, but one of the major things was the problems of having such a remote setting for quarantine. And as we've gone through that process now with, as I said, over 200,000 people coming back, people who are coming back, particularly the most vulnerable that have registered with Department of Foreign Affairs because of their vulnerability and needing to come back for multiple reasons, is they come back because they have other issues. So we've seen mental health issues, we've seen severe other physical issues like end-stage cancer, people about to give birth, all sorts of reasons why you actually need good care on site, and also an ability to be able to get people to hospital if they're needed.